Hollywood loves a fairy tale, but if you scratch the surface, some of those happily ever afters are pure career suicide. Behind the glitz, the gowns, and the groomed for cameras love stories, some of the Golden Age's brightest stars signed marriage licenses that doubled as pink slips for their stardom. So here's the real question. Can tying the knot really kill a legend? Get ready. We're peeling back the tool to reveal the unions that destroyed Hollywood royalty, sometimes for good. Dorothy Dandridge and Jack Dennison. If you want a blueprint for how a marriage can wreck a career, Dorothy Dandridge's story should come with a warning label. Picture this. 1959. Dorothy is the toast of Hollywood. The first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. She's talented, gorgeous, and poised to become an icon. Enter Jack Dennison, a nightclub owner with more ambition than scruples, and just enough charm to worm his way into Dorothy's life. On paper, it looked like a second act, but off camera, it played out like a slow-motion disaster. Almost from the start, Dennison brought more problems than promises. Some in Dorothy's circle whispered that he was a social climber, more interested in Dorothy's fame and what was left of her fortune than her happiness. If that wasn't enough, rumors of abuse began swirling. Dennison was allegedly physically and emotionally abusive behind closed doors. The final insult? Dennison convinced Dorothy to bankroll his floundering restaurant, draining what little money she had left. The marriage wasn't just personally toxic, it was career poison. Hollywood, already unkind to black actresses, turned its back even further. Casting offers dried up, and Dorothy, once a headline, now a footnote, found herself boxed out of the industry she'd fought so hard to break into. By the time she finally left Dennison in 1962, Dorothy was nearly broke and professionally radioactive. Her tragic decline only accelerated from there. Financial ruin, depression, and substance abuse chased her down. When Dorothy Dandridge died in 1965 at just 42, it wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was Hollywood's loss too. Sure, racism and studio politics played their part, but her marriage to Dennison was the iceberg that finally sunk her ship. For anyone who thinks love conquers all, Dorothy's story is a brutal reminder. In Golden Age Hollywood, the wrong marriage could kill your career and your dreams faster than any bad review. Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli. Imagine being the most beloved star in America. Dorothy herself, the heart and soul of MGM. Judy Garland should have had a love story to match her legendary voice. Instead, her marriage to Vincente Minnelli became a cautionary tale of what happens when the Hollywood machine orchestrates your personal life as tightly as a musical number. Garland met Minnelli on the set of Meet Me in St. Louis, where he was the director and she was the film's shining light. Their 1945 wedding looked, for a split second, like classic movie magic. Two creative geniuses tying the knot, with all of MGM's blessing. But Hollywood marriages, especially the studio-crafted ones, rarely have a happy ending. Behind the scenes, Judy was already struggling with anxiety, addiction, and the crushing demands of being MGM's golden goose. Vincente, meanwhile, had his own secrets. Whispers about his relationships with men weren't just rumors. They were an open secret, and both Garland and the studio knew it. For the public, the marriage was the perfect image, stability, a beautiful child, future star Liza Minnelli, and all the trappings of an MGM-approved fairy tale. In reality, it was a union of necessity. Garland was desperate for security, Minnelli needed the cover, and the studio needed the headlines. But the illusion couldn't last. Garland's emotional and mental health deteriorated under the dual pressure of a failing marriage and an unrelenting career. The marriage ended in 1951, but the real casualty was Judy's hold on her stardom. After the split, Garland's career entered a free fall. She was fired from MGM, her home since childhood, and found herself adrift in an industry that chews up and spits out even its brightest stars. Was the marriage doomed from the start? Almost certainly. Did it speed up her fall from grace? No question. Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli's union was less a love story and more a ticking time bomb, one that exploded with all of Hollywood watching. Janet Gaynor and Adrian. Janet Gaynor was Hollywood's original leading lady, the very first Oscar winner for Best Actress, a face that defined silent and early sound cinema. Adrian was the genius costume designer who put the ruby slippers on Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. When they married in 1939, Hollywood let out a collective gasp. But here's the twist. What looked like a glamorous power couple was, in truth, a masterclass in self-preservation and a slow fade to obscurity for both. Let's set the stage. By the late 1930s, rumors about both Gaynor and Adrian's sexuality were circulating in studio corridors. This was the age when open secret meant your career was on the line if you so much as stepped out of line. Marriage wasn't just a romantic choice. It was a survival tactic. The union gave both stars the normalcy that studio bosses and audiences demanded, even as it forced them to keep their real selves locked away. The price for that public facade was steep. Gaynor, once the queen of the box office, withdrew from major roles, her star slowly dimming. Adrian, despite revolutionizing Hollywood fashion, felt the suffocating weight of living a lie. Friends and insiders described their relationship as more like a close partnership than a passionate romance, a bond built on mutual respect, but without fire. The couple adopted a son and kept up appearances, but the spark that once lit up the screen was gone. After Adrian's death in 1959, Gaynor's life became even more private. She forged a deep companionship with Broadway star Mary Martin, further fueling speculation, but never stepped back into the spotlight. In the end, their marriage served its purpose as a shield, but it came at the cost of Gaynor's career and personal fulfillment. In classic Hollywood, sometimes a happily ever after is just another word for fading away. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor's marriage is the kind of Hollywood script that's equal parts romance, power play, and PR spin. On the surface, it looked like the ultimate love match. Two megastars, perfectly photogenic, gracing every red carpet with effortless chemistry. But behind the curtain, this was less golden couple and more golden cage, built to please the studio bosses rather than the hearts involved. MGM practically orchestrated this union. Stanwyck, fiercely independent and notoriously private, was already an A-list icon. Taylor was MGM's clean-cut matinee idol, but he carried the burden of persistent rumors about his sexuality, rumors the studio would do anything to stamp out. Enter Stanwyck, and suddenly, both stars had airtight alibis. She had a real man. He had a glamorous wife. Problem solved, at least on the surface. Their personal dynamic was complicated. Friends say Stanwyck treated Taylor more like a son than a lover, even calling him Junior. Their hobbies couldn't have been more different. He was into outdoor sports. She preferred the solitude of home and career. That infamous camping trip they took? It's the stuff of Hollywood legend, an utter disaster. The two of them more lost than in love. The cracks widened as the years went by. Taylor's career began to drift. Stanwyck's independent streak clashed with the increasingly artificial nature of their union. When Taylor traveled to Rome to film Quo Vadis in 1950, tabloids caught him with a young Italian actress, and Stanwyck flew to Italy, not for romance, but to maintain the facade. By the time their divorce was finalized in 1951, the illusion had shattered. Afterward, both careers suffered. Stanwyck's star power faded as Hollywood evolved. Taylor never quite regained his golden boy momentum. Their marriage, meant to solidify their legacies, ironically marked the beginning of their end in the A-list spotlight. In the end, it wasn't love that did them in. It was the burden of living a script someone else wrote. Rudolph Valentino and Gene Aker. If you're hunting for old Hollywood melodrama, Rudolph Valentino and Gene Aker's marriage is pure box office gold and box office poison. Valentino, the original Latin lover, set 1920s America on fire with his looks and smoldering screen presence. He was the man every woman wanted, until he met Gene Aker, and the legend took a wild detour. The wedding itself, in 1919, was a whirlwind, romantic, glamorous, but hiding a fatal flaw. Jean Aker had cold feet, so cold, in fact, that on their wedding night, she locked Valentino out of their hotel room. The marriage was never consummated, and the gossip machine went into overdrive. Whispers spread that Aker was in love with another woman, the notorious cabaret star Alla Nazimova, and Hollywood's underground LGBTQ+ scene suddenly had a front-page headline. For Valentino, this so-called union was a career torpedo. The scandal made him a tabloid target and stoked rumors about his own sexuality. His next marriage, to designer Natasha Rambova, was equally contentious. Critics called it a publicity stunt, a move to distract from his ever-mounting scandals. Instead of rebuilding his image, it only gave the press more ammunition. Studio heads, desperate to avoid controversy, became increasingly wary of casting him in romantic leads. The aftermath was brutal. Valentino's lover image, so essential to his box office draw, became a double-edged sword, slashing his career prospects as quickly as it built them. The public's appetite for scandal grew, but the studio's patience wore thin. When Valentino died suddenly, at just 31, the world mourned the loss of a legend. But many insiders quietly admitted that Hollywood had already turned the page on its original heartthrob. His tumultuous marriages didn't just end in heartbreak, they ended in career suicide, the kind only old Hollywood could orchestrate. Peter Lofford and Patricia Kennedy. Peter Lofford was the dashing British actor who seemed to have it all. A spot in the Rat Pack, a Hollywood pedigree, and more charm than a box of tuxedoed puppies. But his marriage to Patricia Kennedy would become the ultimate double-edged sword, gifting him access to the world's most famous family and, at the same time, writing the obituary for his movie career. The match, in 1954, was more than romantic. It was political theater. Lofford got a direct pipeline to American royalty, and the Kennedys snagged a bona fide Hollywood star for their family photo album. For a while, Lofford played the role of dutiful husband, blending Hollywood glamour with Kennedy clout. But behind closed doors, things were falling apart. Lofford's womanizing and growing substance abuse didn't exactly fit the squeaky clean Kennedy image. The real career killer, though, was the pressure that came with the Kennedy connection. Lofford found himself increasingly typecast, not just in films, but in life. He was expected to toe the line, avoid scandal, and act as a go-between for the family's secret dealings. By the early 1960s, his acting gigs dried up. His off-screen persona eclipsed his on-screen roles. The final straw came with their divorce in 1966. Hollywood didn't want him. The Kennedys had no use for him, and Lofford was left floating in social limbo, famous for who he'd married, infamous for who he'd lost. His later years became a tragic cocktail of fading fame, regret, and substance abuse. By the time he passed away in 1984, Peter Lofford was a cautionary tale. A man whose marriage to a Kennedy didn't just end his career, it erased him from the A-list altogether. In Hollywood, sometimes marrying into power means losing your own. Clark Gable and Kay Williams. By the time Clark Gable married Kay Williams in 1955, the King of Hollywood was already a legend. But here's the part Hollywood never put on the movie posters. Sometimes even a king's final act is a slow fade into obscurity, scripted not by the studios, but by his own choices in love. After losing the love of his life, Carole Lombard, in a tragic plane crash, Gable bounced through relationships, some orchestrated by studios, others by sheer exhaustion from the performance of being Clark Gable. Kay Williams was a glamorous socialite, an actress, and, crucially for Gable, someone who offered calm after decades of turbulence. On the surface, this marriage looked like his shot at happiness. Insiders, though, saw it for what it was: a marriage of comfort, not passion, built on mutual need rather than Hollywood fireworks. Williams had her own baggage: multiple high-profile marriages, a sharp sense of survival, and just enough polish to play the part of Mrs. Clark Gable. But Hollywood, by then, was hungry for youth, new faces, and fresh scandals. Gable, now a respectable married man, seemed to lose his edge. Offers dwindled. His legendary persona, once dangerous and thrilling, softened into safe, paternal, and, frankly, forgettable roles. Williams managed his household but couldn't revive his career. Gable's best days were behind him, and the industry moved on. His sudden death in 1960, just months before Williams gave birth to their son, put a permanent period on his career. The public wondered, was his final marriage a last attempt at normalcy, or just another performance, this time for the benefit of the tabloids and his own loneliness? Either way, Gable's union with Williams marked the quiet end of an era. The king had abdicated, not with a scandal, but with a whimper, a cautionary tale about what happens when Hollywood royalty tries to retire into the background. Tallulah Bankhead and John Emery. Tallulah Bankhead never played by anyone's rules, least of all Hollywood's. With a voice like gravel and a wit sharper than a switchblade, she was the original rule breaker. So when she married actor John Emery in 1937, Hollywood collectively arched an eyebrow. Was this fiery Alabama wild child really settling down? Spoiler: not a chance. Their marriage was short, stormy, and smelled suspiciously like a PR band-aid. Bankhead had always lived loudly, refusing to hide her attraction to both men and women, a move that was pure career poison in an era when studios dictated every headline. Emery, a talented but comparatively low-wattage actor, was cast in the role of dutiful husband, but he never managed to tame Tallulah's wild side. She was infamous for her parties, her sharp tongue, and her outrageous honesty, traits that made her a tabloid staple and a nightmare for any studio trying to control her image. Inevitably, the marriage dissolved after just 4 years, leaving Bankhead even more defiant and Hollywood even more nervous. Instead of softening her reputation, the union amplified it. After the divorce, casting directors became hesitant, seeing Bankhead as unmanageable, unmarketable, and unwilling to play the industry's game. She was blackballed from many big projects, her film roles dried up, and she retreated to Broadway and radio, where the rules were looser but the audiences smaller. Bankhead never remarried. She doubled down on her persona, refusing to apologize for who she was. The price? Hollywood turned its back. Her career as a leading lady was over, and her legend became that of a rebel who burned too brightly to fit inside any marriage or any studio's plan. Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller. Marilyn Monroe's marriage to playwright Arthur Miller was supposed to be the ultimate transformation, a Hollywood bombshell shedding her skin to become an artist's muse, finally taken seriously. Instead, it became the final chapter in her ongoing struggle for identity, pushing her career off a cliff in slow motion. On paper, it was a jaw-dropping match. Monroe, the world's most famous sex symbol, weds Miller, the brooding intellectual behind Death of a Salesman. The world tuned in for a real-life fairy tale. But Monroe wasn't just looking for love. She was desperate for respect. She threw herself into Miller's world of books and ideas, craving the validation that Hollywood had always denied her. For Miller, the marriage meant instant celebrity, a spotlight brighter than any literary award could offer. But the fairy tale soured fast. Monroe, already battling anxiety and substance abuse, found Miller's intellectualism both a lifeline and a burden. He reportedly grew disillusioned, penning private notes about his embarrassment over Monroe's behavior. Monroe, ever sensitive to rejection, unraveled further when she discovered his cruel words. The press, smelling blood, hounded their every move. Career-wise, Monroe's bid for legitimacy backfired. The studios saw her as difficult, unreliable, and damaged goods. Major projects were shelved or recast, and Monroe's own self-doubt became a self-fulfilling prophecy. After the couple's divorce in 1961, Monroe's final years were a tangle of unfinished projects, health issues, and tabloid infamy. Her tragic death at just 36 became the ultimate cautionary tale. Fame, intelligence, and love don't always play nice in Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller's marriage didn't just end in heartbreak. It helped end the most luminous career Hollywood ever produced. Sometimes, the greatest transformation is also the greatest undoing. Gloria Swanson and Herbert K. Somborn. If you think messy divorces are a modern Hollywood phenomenon, meet Gloria Swanson, the original queen of scandal, whose marriage to Herbert K. Somborn in 1919 reads like a tabloid fever dream decades ahead of its time. Swanson, already a blazing silent film star, married Somborn, a film executive and owner of the famed Brown Derby restaurant, at the peak of her powers. But what began as a whirlwind romance quickly morphed into a courtroom circus that would shake her career to its core. Swanson was the ultimate image of Hollywood glam. Dramatic, mysterious, and always 2 steps ahead of the gossip columnists. But behind closed doors, the marriage was a battlefield. Somborn was jealous, controlling, and convinced that his wife's fame was built on more than just acting talent. When he filed for divorce in 1922, he didn't just serve papers, he dropped a bombshell. Somborn accused Swanson of having affairs with 14 men, including some of Hollywood's most powerful moguls and leading men. The studio system, obsessed with maintaining the illusion of virtue, went into meltdown mode. The scandal exploded across headlines, dragging Swanson's reputation through the mud. Suddenly, she was more famous for her love life than her films. Studios grew nervous about casting her, sponsors threatened to pull out, and her public persona took a hit that even she struggled to spin into box office gold. Swanson, ever the survivor, leaned into the drama, giving interviews, controlling her own narrative, and even starring in more mature roles that mirrored her real-life tumult. But the cost was immense. Her box office draw waned as public fascination shifted from her acting to her off-screen antics. The Somborn divorce not only emptied her bank account with an infamous 6-figure settlement, it marked the end of her era as Hollywood's untouchable leading lady. Though she would later claw her way back, most notably in Sunset Boulevard, the Somborn marriage was the beginning of her first great fall. In classic Hollywood, scandal sells, but it doesn't always buy you a future. Vincent Price and Mary Grant. Vincent Price, with that unmistakable velvet voice and those villainous eyebrows, was the king of classic horror. But when it came to his real-life role as a husband, the plot was anything but straightforward. Price married Mary Grant in 1949, forming a couple as elegant and mysterious as any of his on-screen roles. To the world, they were the image of mid-century sophistication. He, the urbane star; she, the celebrated costume designer. Behind the scenes, though, their union was 1 part romance, 2 parts arrangement. You see, Price's sexuality was the subject of persistent Hollywood whispers. He was rumored to have had relationships with both men and women, a truth the era's rigid standards demanded be hidden at all costs. For Mary, the marriage meant access to the Hollywood social set, stability, and the safety of a star's shadow. For Vincent, it meant a well-dressed cloak over a personal life the studio system simply wouldn't tolerate in the open. Professionally, the partnership allowed both to thrive, for a while. But Hollywood's hunger for scandal, and its fear of the unconventional, eventually worked against them. As attitudes slowly shifted in the 1960s and 1970s, Price's earlier gentleman-villain roles fell out of vogue, and his persona became less bankable. He pivoted to stage and television, but the magic of his leading man days never returned. After their divorce in 1973, Price became more vocal about his support for LGBTQ+ rights, almost as if he was finally breathing freely after decades of holding his breath. Did their marriage kill his career outright? Not in a single blow, but it locked Price and Grant into roles neither could escape. The man who could chill an audience with a single line became, in real life, another victim of Hollywood's closet. Never quite free, never quite finished, and always just out of reach of a storybook ending. Danny Kaye and Sylvia Fine. Danny Kaye was the jester king of classic Hollywood, rubber-faced, quick-tongued, and so energetic you'd swear he ran on rocket fuel. But if his performances were chaotic joy, his personal life was organized chaos. In 1940, Kaye married Sylvia Fine, a whip-smart songwriter who was both the architect and the gatekeeper of his career. From the outside, they looked like the ultimate creative duo. She wrote the songs, he stole the spotlight. But the Kaye-Fine marriage was less a love story and more a business contract, written in ballads and backstage contracts. Hollywood insiders gossiped for decades about Kaye's sexuality, with persistent rumors of deep friendships, possibly more with men, including Laurence Olivier. Fine, meanwhile, was more manager than wife, a partner in image maintenance, less so in candlelit romance. Their relationship was mutually beneficial. Kaye projected the wholesome family man vibe the studios demanded, and Fine kept the checks rolling in and the scandals out. As the years rolled by, their marriage grew even more strategic and distant. By the 1950s, the couple led largely separate lives, each carving out their own territory in the Kaye business empire. While they never divorced, they were partners in the loosest sense, bonded by legacy, not intimacy. Here's the kicker. Kaye's film career, so bright in the 1940s and 50s, started to dim as the act wore thin and the persona no longer suited changing tastes. Without the spark of new creative passion, he shifted to charity work, TV, and the odd concert. The man who could make millions laugh had locked himself into a marriage that, ironically, left both parties performing for the crowd and neither finding their own happy ending. Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates. You want to talk about a marriage engineered for the cameras? Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates are Exhibit A. By the 1950s, Hudson wasn't just a movie star. He was Hollywood's platinum standard for masculinity, a heartthrob so big the studio practically built a closet around him. And behind that closet door, a truth that the studio and the era wouldn't let him live out loud. Enter Phyllis Gates, Hudson's agent secretary, who went from behind the desk to blushing bride in a ceremony so secretive that even most of their friends were left off the guest list. Almost immediately, the tabloids got the scoop, courtesy of Hudson's own agent. The message was clear. Hollywood's dreamboat was officially off the market, and all those pesky rumors about his sexuality could be safely swept under the red carpet. But the illusion was doomed. Gates claimed she was in love, but the marriage quickly became a minefield of suspicion and frustration. Gates reportedly burned Hudson's newly acquired tight jeans, and arguments over Hudson's true nature exploded behind closed doors. The studio's desperate attempt at image management became a personal hell for both. Hudson's career, built on the facade of the ideal leading man, started to feel brittle. The cracks deepened as the public and private pressures mounted. 3 years in, the marriage imploded. Gates and Hudson separated in 1958. Years later, private investigator files surfaced, recordings of Gates confronting Hudson about his sexuality, fanning the flames of speculation yet again. Hudson's subsequent career was a tightrope act, always smiling, always careful, never quite free. In the end, his marriage to Gates didn't save his image. If anything, it put his real self further out of reach, leaving him and the industry trapped by its own fiction. Hollywood wanted a fairy tale, but all it got was a front-page tragedy. Cole Porter and Linda Lee Thomas. Cole Porter wasn't your typical Hollywood heartbreaker. He was the sly, sharp-tongued genius behind some of America's greatest songs. But when it came to his marriage with Linda Lee Thomas, the story gets stickier than a Gershwin chord change. Porter, whose attraction to men was the worst-kept secret in Manhattan, needed a shield. And Linda, wealthy, elegant, and fiercely loyal, fit the bill perfectly. They married in 1919, forming what many called the most sophisticated union in show business. Porter got stability, social cover, and a constant companion on his world travels. Linda, burned by a violent first marriage, found respect, glamour, and a life that put her at the center of every party worth attending. Together, they threw legendary soirees in Paris, Venice, and New York, building a fortress of wit and style against the outside world. But for all the surface harmony, the emotional cost was high. Porter's career soared on the back of songs about love and longing, while he navigated the heartbreak of never living authentically. Linda, too, paid a price. Forever the socialite, never the lover. Theirs was a partnership rooted in loyalty, not passion, a mutually beneficial arrangement that locked both into carefully chosen roles. As the decades passed, the world changed, but the rules of old Hollywood did not. When Linda died in 1954, Porter was inconsolable. His creative flame never quite the same. His own decline followed swiftly, and he retreated into isolation. Their marriage didn't end in scandal, but in its own quiet way, it shut the door on two careers. Porter's songwriting magic dimmed, and Linda's public persona faded to a memory of a vanished era. In Hollywood, sometimes the most powerful unions are the ones that quietly erase you. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. Before there was Brangelina or Burton and Taylor, there was Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, the original royalty of Hollywood. Their 1920 marriage was billed as a real-life fairy tale, America's sweetheart, and the dashing swashbuckler, uniting to rule a brand new kingdom built on celluloid dreams. For a while, they were untouchable. Fans lined the streets just to see them hold hands, and their mansion, Pickfair, became the literal epicenter of Golden Age glamour. But when the world puts you on a pedestal, there's only one direction left to go. Pickford and Fairbanks didn't just marry each other, they married the public's fantasy of perfection. And that fantasy became an impossible standard. As the 1920s roared, Pickford's girl with the curls persona grew stale, especially as talkies took over and audiences demanded something new. Fairbanks, once the athletic action hero, aged out of his roles and bristled at fading relevance. Inside Pickfair, the magic faded fast. Then came the rumors, affairs, jealousy, and resentment, fueled by relentless public scrutiny and personal ambition. The couple's combined star power started to wane. Pickford, desperate to stay America's sweetheart, struggled to transition into adult roles, while Fairbanks's on-screen athleticism gave way to aching knees and public indifference. Hollywood, always hungry for the next sensation, moved on. By 1936, it was over. Their divorce sent shockwaves through the industry, a messy public end for a marriage built on myth. Neither star ever truly reclaimed their old glory. Pickford retreated behind the scenes, a pioneer producer, but no longer the box office draw. Fairbanks faded from the screen altogether, dying just a few years later. Their marriage, so dazzling at first, became the template for how a union can make legends and break them in the harsh light of Hollywood's never-ending spotlight. So next time you hear about a Hollywood dream couple, remember, sometimes the wedding bells are really warning sirens. These marriages didn't just end in heartbreak, they closed the curtain on some of the brightest stars Tinseltown ever produced. What do you think? Were these unions doomed from the start? Or just victims of an industry that punishes the real thing? Drop your take in the comments, hit subscribe for more untold stories, and keep questioning what's real behind Hollywood's golden facade.